Hello everyone, my name is Heather and welcome to the channel Bookables. Since it is near Valentine's Day, the day of love, I like to do romance videos around this time of year because obviously Valentine's Day romance. Last year I did my top 20 favorite romances of all time, and this year I'm breaking it down even further by my top 10. And you think, oh well, why would you do this? Because you're in your top 20. I have some new changes. It's going to change every year. Just because I say they're my top 20 does not mean they're going to change. Some might leave, some might come in, some might stay the same. But either way, I thought I would do like my top 10, my favorites of all favorite romances. So if you want more in depth of these, like my top 20, I'll link it down below. But of course, like I said, I have some newcomers to this list, which I'm very excited about. And I think that will continue to go on because as we read more, we add more to our list. These are my top 10. These are my favorites of the favorites. Without further ado, let's get into it because I have a lot of feelings about them because they are my favorites. At number 10 is a brand new addition to this list, and that is In a Jam by Kate Canterbury. I read this last year and fell in love with it. This is a Kindle Unlimited book. It's indie published, and I just fell in love with it. I read it just on a whim, and I'm so glad I did because it's amazing. So this follows two characters, Shay and Noah. Shay, at the beginning of the book, gets broken up with right before her wedding, so she's pretty much down and out, and then she learns that one of her great aunt died and left her tulip farm, and she's like, you know, why not? It's a fresh start. It's time, you know, for a new beginning. And she goes there and she learns that, yes, she inherited this tulip farm, but she has to be married within a year to keep it. And so then comes in the neighboring farm guy, Noah, who has had a crush on Shay since high school. So he's like, you know, we can get married if I can have some of your farmland, then you can keep your farm, da 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 da. You can guess where this is going. He also has guardianship of his younger sister. He also has guardianship of his niece, and it's just a beautiful, romantic, and steamy book. One that's really lengthy, which I find a lot of Kindle Unlimited books are, but man, I loved every second of this and would highly recommend it. So it definitely found a place on my top 10, and I'm pretty excited about that. Coming at number 9 is the Brown Sisters series by Talia Hibbert. So this is 3 books in the series, and I think as more time goes on, my favorite is the first one, Get a Life, Chloe Brown. Each one of them follows a different Brown sister. First we have Get a Life, Chloe Brown. Then we have Take a Hint, Danny Brown. And then lastly we have Act Your Age, Eve Brown. And they're all just really cute and adorable romances. If you've read Talia Hibbert, you know she writes really adorable, steamy, and just really cute romances. This one follows a character named Chloe, who's chronically ill, and she's kind of a loner, and she decides she wants, and with a near brush of death, like she almost gets in a car accident, she decides maybe she needs to live more, open herself up. So she like makes a list like enjoy a drunken night out, ride a motorcycle, go camping, and then she meets kind of her apartment's maintenance guy, Red, who's going to help her with this list, and it's just an old sweet romance that I love and adore. Talia Hibbert is a staple in the romance community with good reason. Coming in at number 8 is Beach Read by Emily Henry. So Emily Henry is also a staple in the romance community. She quickly took the romance world by storm. Like, I don't think any of us were expecting it. This was her first foray, this one in particular, into adult romance, and man, she has just staked her claim in it and planted her flag, and I'm not mad about it at all. So this one makes my list. This is the only Emily Henry I have on this because this one is my favorite romance of hers. Now, if you ask me my favorite Emily Henry book, I will gladly say it's Happy Place, but I do not consider this really very romantic. I love it for various other reasons. The romance is not one of them, which is weird. My favorite romance of hers, hands down, is her first one, Beach Read. It is a hate to love, very just interesting premise that it's just really cool. So we follow 2 characters, Augustus and January, and they are authors. Augustus writes literary fiction, and January writes romance. They both like rent this beach house that are right next door to each other, and they're both having hard times writing their next novel. So they decide, let's kind of team up together. They really don't like each other. They kind of have a very not so amiable relationship, but they decide, let's team up. Maybe January will write some literary fiction, do some research with him, and maybe he'll write like a happily ever after. They decide to kind of switch genres, if you will. Meanwhile, they both have a lot of life stuff going on, a lot of grief under the surface, and man, it was a beautiful hate to love romance that I loved and adore. Despite the title Beach Read, I wouldn't say this is like a happy-go-lucky romantic read. No, it's a romantic read, yes, but it's got, like I said, a lot of grief and pretty heavy undertones, but man, my favorite romance of hers by far. Next up, we have one that has just stayed on my list for a long time, and that is the Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. This is part of a series, and this first book is my favorite of hers by far. So we follow a character named Stella, has Asperger's, which I know now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is kind of phased out. They don't really talk about Asperger's anymore. It's just mainly autism. And if you don't know, autism is such a broad spectrum. Like, it is a lot. Like, and I can say that with experience. My son is autistic. So whenever I can read about a character that is also autistic, I try to gravitate towards that, because when you meet one person with autism, guess what? You met one person with autism. They're also vastly different. It is a broad spectrum. So Stella is more on the Asperger's side, which I believe they are very just kind of have a hard time socially, which I think is a very autistic thing in general, in my opinion. But that's just me. Like I said, I'm not an expert on this. Just because I'm a parent of an autistic child does not make me an expert. I am far from it. I wish I was a little bit more of an expert. I truly do. But anyway, we follow Estella, and she's like I said, she has Asperger's. So she's living a very quiet kind of life, and she decides she wants to maybe experience more, and maybe more in the love department. So she decides to hire a male escort to teach her these things. And she meets Michael, who is that, and he agrees. And of course, feelings go from there. And it's a beautiful romance book. You get to see love from a different perspective, and it just was really great. I love this one. It is very steamy. It's one of the very first steamy books I read, and whoo, it is still really steamy to this day. I love this series, and I love how she makes an effort to talk about autism and make her characters neurodivergent. I love that. So highly recommend checking out the series. Coming in number 6 is another staple on my list, and that is The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. Man, oh man. The book still gets talked about in Book Talk and BookTube, and I'm so happy because it was amazing. I read it when it first came out. I've read a lot of K.A. Tucker books, and I just love Jonah and Calla so dearly. So in this book, we follow a character named Calla, and she lives in Canada, and she learns that her father is dying, and she's never had a good relationship with her father. He lives in Alaska. Her mom and her kind of left when they were younger, when, you know, her mom was like, look, you can either choose being a pilot in Alaska in like kind of the very brusque wilderness, if you live in Alaska, you know, or we can move. And he decided to choose the pilot life. So her mom and her left with that, and so now she learns that her father's dying, and she decides to go to Alaska to kind of maybe see if she can repair those old wounds and get a good relationship with her dad. While she's there, she meets another gruff pilot named Jonah, who thinks she is just the city girl, like just straight up Carrie Bradshaw from New York City, and you know, she likes her almond milk and her running and things like that, and they couldn't be more opposite, and that makes for a great romance, my friend. You have a very gruff and kind of snarky pilot with a very kind of materialistic and a flaunty girl, I guess you could say, and it is just amazing. I love it. This is part of a series. You won't be disappointed you read this. It's set in Alaska, which is beautiful, but it is a big thing. I think depending where you live at in Alaska, it can be very brutal and things like that. I personally know I could not survive in a colder seat. I know I personally could not survive in a colder place to live. I couldn't. I get seasonal depression as is, and I live in Virginia, and it doesn't get that crazy cold. So, but either way, this romance, chef's kiss, will always be on my list. Next up, we have Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. I love this book. Whenever I talk about an epic, sweeping romance story, I always talk about this book. This is literally that. If you want just a quick, fast, fun romance read any literally read any of other Christina Lauren books. But if you want like a very intense love story, this is the book for you. So in this book, we follow a character named Macy, who we follow in 2 different timelines. One now where she's ambitious, she has a great job, she's marrying this doctor soon. And then we follow her back in time when she meets her best friend Elliot, and they become best friends and something more, and something has ripped them apart. And so now when she runs into him many years later, a lot of old feelings come up, and a lot of old, like, you know, passion, but also really a lot of resentment comes into play as well. And so basically it says, will have to overcome the past in himself to revive her faith in the possibility of an all-consuming love. The story of the heart can never be unwritten. I love this one. It's like childhood lovers, but something happens and you figure it out years later, and it's like second chance romance. It is just a beautiful one. My favorite Christina Lauren book, hands down. If you want something fun and romantic still, that's another great one, honestly. The Unhoneymooners is great by them. My two favorite by this author, hands down, and will probably always be. I have a brand new addition to this list, and that is the 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. Again, much like Love in Other Words, I would classify this as a sweeping, beautiful love story. This one is very difficult to explain. Every time I explain it, I feel like I just do it horribly, but I love it. So just know that, bottom line, before I try to explain it. So in this book, we follow a character named Clementine, and she, at the beginning of this book, loses her aunt, who is like her best friend, their travel buddy, everything's amazing, and so she's going through a lot of grief. She also inherits her aunt's apartment, and her aunt has always told her apartment's kind of weird. Like, you know, like sometimes pigeons will fly in, sometimes the AC won't work. Also, it's got like a rift in time, because sometimes when you step in the apartment, it's 7 years. Either it could be 7 years from the future or 7 years in the past. It's always 7 years, and you can't ever control it. So when Clementine moves into her aunt's apartment, she is shocked when she finds a guy in her apartment, and it is 7 years ago. Her aunt is still alive and well. She's traveling, so she decided this guy can move in for 3 months. And his guy, I forget his name, is Ewan, I believe. And so they kind of fall in love. And it's difficult because technically it's 7 years in the past for him, and it's her currently. So she's like, should I find him in real time? You know, it's just so hard to explain. Think of like The Lake House with Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, only a little different, but kind of the same. But it's a beautiful love story they share. Like, goodness me, it was so sweeping, so beautiful. I could not get enough of it, and it will hands down always have a place on my list. Like, I love and adore this book. If you want a beautiful love story, this is a great one to read. Next up, we have another one that is one of my favorites of all time, and that is the Happy Ever After playlist by Abby Jimenez. This one is my favorite by her. She has also made a name in the romance world, which I am so happy for, because the first book I ever read by her was her first book, The Friend Zone. Did not like it, but then I read the kind of companion sequel novel, which is this one. Loved it. It has been my favorite ever since, and I still don't own a copy, and that truly is a crime. Why? I don't know. I don't even remember the character's name. Just bear with me. So at the beginning of the book, we have our amazing character, and she has just lost her fiance. So she is dealing with a lot of grief and a lot of sadness. And then one day she's just driving, and a dog literally jumps in her car, and she's like, what the hell? And so she tries to figure out who the dog's owner is, because he's owned, and she can't ever really figure it out. And then this dog has really come to be a big companion of hers, and then she learns eventually that he does have an owner, and it is a huge kind of up-and-comer country star. And he's like, hey, can I have my dog back? Like, I was on tour in Australia, and I would like my dog back. And she's like, well, I'm like, he's my dog now, because you done left him, so he's mine. And so basically they talk online a lot, then they eventually meet, and it's all about learning to love again after losing someone, about grief and the process of that, and how it's different for each person. She has a really hard time opening up and letting someone in, because she had loved someone with all her heart, and now they're not there, and I can't even begin to understand what that's like. So it was just a beautiful love story. As you can see, I like a lot of like kind of lighthearted romances, but I also like a really romantic, deep at the core, really nitty gritty love, and this one was that. It was a beautiful love story that I would highly recommend. I feel like when you hear about a lot of her books, you hear about her newest ones with Happy Place. No, you hear about a lot of her newest ones like Part of Your World and Yours Truly. I love this one. This one, hands down, is my favorite of hers, and will probably always be my favorite of hers. We have another new one on this list, and that is The Wall of Winnipeg and Me by Mariana Zapata. Who knew that this was going to be on here? Probably everybody. Did I expect it to be on my number 2? Not at all, but here we are. I love this one. I read this on a whim last year, fell in love with it. Again, it's another slow burn type of romance. This one we follow a character named Vanessa, who is an assistant to Aiden, who is a pro football player, and he's gruff and stuff. And at the beginning of the book, Vanessa's like, look, I've been your assistant for years. You kind of treat me like crap, so I'm leaving. Like, I'm done with this. I want something better. And then who comes knocking on her door a few days later but Aiden? He's like, hey, I forgot to renew my green card. I'm gonna be like deported soon, so could you like marry me and I'll like pay for your college and stuff? And she's like, well, crap, I guess so. So it's a romance story about kind of an assistant and a boss, then like a fake marriage, and then they become kind of friends, and then they could become something more. And let me tell you, Maria Zapata writes the slow burnest of all slow burnest. I wish there was a little bit more romance in this one, but man, the buildup makes it all worth it. I love this one. My favorite of hers by far. If you want just a slow, emphasize, slow burn get yourself this book. You will not be disappointed. My number one, which has been my number one for forever and will continue to be, and that is The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. I think the reason why this is my number one is because this was the first romance I truly fell in love with. Like, I am a mother. I don't stay up late often because if you don't know, I really covet my sleep and I don't get a lot of it because my kids don't like sleep and I do. I'm sure other parents out there can understand. So when a book will make me stay up to like 3 or 4 a.m. Like that is going down in the books, okay, my friend? Like I will remember that. And this one I did. Like I stayed up late as mess to finish this book. I just fell in love with it. I still love it. I don't think the movie adaptation is really good at all, but still, I love this book. If you don't know this book, I'm sure you've seen it, it's everywhere. It follows a character named Lucy, who she's an assistant to a CEO of a book company. And then we also have Josh, assistant to the other CEO. So they're always kind of butting heads. And then they learn that a new job is opening up and they both can have the opportunity. So they're trying to compete for it. And so they basically hate each other. And they have these little games they do of like, she'll like figure out what color shirt he'll wear that day. He'll figure out, you know, things like that. And of course you can guess it's hate to love, you know, it's clearly obvious, but I love the dialogue in it is amazing. I think the romance is really beautiful. It's a little bit steamy and I just love this book. Like, I think it will always be my favorite because like I told you, I stayed up late reading it and I don't do that at all. So I will always remember it for that. And it's just the first book that really kind of pivoted and kind of focused my love into romance, and I will always be grateful for that. My top 10 romance reads, my friends. There's a lot of them. Will this list change by next year? Probably. I hope so, because that means I get to read more amazing romances, which I am always happy to do. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.